Just as a recap, or just to start off with, let me just put in the chat. We got our in the chat I have over here. That's our link if you'd like to catch up on anything that you might have missed or review anything. So that's there. That's available again at our Kohelet website. It's also on YouTube, which is, I mean, the Kohelet website just provides the link to the YouTube. And so that's if you want to catch up on anything. Where we are is we are about halfway or in the middle of the third chapter of Kohelet, third chapter of Ecclesiastes over here. And we just kind of got past probably the most famous part of the book of Kohelet, which is where the birds sing their song again. For everything there's a season. All right, so we just wrapped up those verses over there and what it is that he's trying to tell us. And the way we understood it was that he's trying to give us a bunch of, each one of those is revealing to us another hint to how it is that we actually are supposed to gain happiness through the material in this world, right? So again, just to backtrack to the second chapter, is he discussed where, he went through his whole research into happiness. Is it possible to gain happiness from the material? He researched, and he at first he basically came out and said, no, this material world is giving us more pain than happiness. To which his own response is, that can't be, because Hashem put it here. God put it here for a purpose, and we're supposed to gain something from it. It can't just be a terrible thing that we're stuck with. So instead, he goes out and is laying in front of us a path towards happiness, towards gain. Again, happiness not from spirituality, happiness from the physical world. Happiness from spirituality is a different discussion. He's specifically discussing how to gain happiness from this physical world. And where we got up to last week, we actually did verse 11, but we're actually going to we're going to start again from verse 11 this week, because we ended up doing it we stuck it in the last minute there, and so it's worth reviewing. As I pointed out last week also, however, verse 11 is very, very difficult to translate. It doesn't actually translate well, and he's using some flowery way of speaking that makes it very hard to just put the sentence together. So again, we're going to take it piece by piece, but we're going to, we're going to see how he says what he says. And again, we're actually viewing verse 11 through the eyes of Rashi, even though we don't always follow Rashi's explanation. But here we're specifically going to take Rashi's take on the verse 11, because it happens to fit very well what we're saying over here. So without any further ado, I'm going to jump into the screen share so everyone could see all together. And again, as I mentioned in the past, I do not provide you with the English on the page, because we're trying to give a more perfect translation of the words. So we're going through it word by word or phrase by phrase, and to try and give a better, more exact or more specific translation than what you often find in the translations. And again, we said this is kind of the encapsulating point of the entire list of things, that this time for this and a time for that, a time for this and a time for that. He basically says like this: Et hakol asa, everything that he created, that God created, yafeh v'ito, is beautiful in its time. Okay. Again, ito, the idea of 8 being a spontaneous thing, something that just kind of pops out of nowhere. So everything is appropriate for its time that it just seems to take for itself. That everything fits perfectly in its time that it shows up. Gam et ha'olam natan bli bam. And God has also placed the world in their hearts. Mi bili asher lo yimtza ha'adam et ha'maseh asher asah Elokim mirosh vad sof. Without giving the ability for people to find and to understand everything that God has done from beginning to end. Now, again, that's a very strange, if you were to try to translate it word by word, it doesn't really work. That's why I kind of read that all together. I could try to break it up a little better. So let me try it one more time. Et hakol asa yafeh v'ito. Once again, everything that he created is beautiful, and it's in its time. Gam et ha'olam natan bli bam. And he has also placed the world in their hearts. Mi beli asher lo yimtza ha'adam. With an inability for man to find. for humankind to find or to understand, to grasp at Hamasa Asher Asaha Elokim, the acts that God has done, Mirosh Vadso, from beginning to end. So he said, in a certain way, this is the encapsulating point of everything we've seen about this path towards happiness, is that King Solomon is telling us over here that, number one, everything is appropriate in its time. There is a time and place for everything. That's number one. Number two is, we can't force that time to happen. We can't force different times to be one way or the other. So we said, like, for example, the last thing listed was that there's a time for peace and a time for war. Well, nobody wants to live in a time of war, but unfortunately, people end up in bad times. We're kind of translating that as bad times. There's good times and bad times, right? So you can't force this. You can't force it one way or the other. We're stuck, so to speak. We are placed in whatever instance we are placed in. All right. As I said last week, also, you would never ever want to be born at any time besides for the 20th and 21st centuries of that we currently live in. This is like the best time in human history, documentable best time in human history to ever be alive. At the same time, yeah, we've got some ups and downs. We had a World War I, World War II, 9/11, COVID, Vietnam, right? So there are hiccups throughout those times. So you have good times and bad times. You can't force a time to be one way or the other. Your general average person, does not have an ability to control that. So again, it's good in its time, but we can't necessarily fully grasp that act that God has done from beginning to end, he says.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you focus on Natan, Blibam, Mibli? Those three words are confusing me. Everything else makes sense, but those three words are confusing.
They're confusing me too.
Oh, okay.
My understanding is Gamat Olam Natan Blibam. That's where you're going to put your comma over there. So he has placed the world in their hearts, meaning he's given them a view into the world, right? You have a kind of a window into the world, but that window is mibali, which means without, right? For example, they use this term mibali also when the Jews were leaving Egypt and they had no food in the desert. They said mibali in kvarim. Are we without? Were we without graves in Egypt that we had to come out into the desert? Or that was their complaint against Moses. So that mibali means without the ability. Now he does a double negative, which is a common thing in Hebrew grammar. Without the ability that you cannot find or you cannot grasp the action that Hashem has done. Okay, so it's again, you're given a window into it. Thank you for your question, because that actually helped clarify it for me too. We're given a window into it. It's given into our hearts to see the world without a full ability to grasp the world. So that makes sense. I hope that helps.
So Blibam is within our hearts?
Yes.
Okay.
And mi beli is without. So again, there's like a comma right after the word Blibam.
Okay.
Let me pull this up over here. Here we get a little bit of the vocalization. Yeah, so if you were to have, I usually take them off, but if you have the cantillation marks over here, there's a minor break at that point in the phrase. So that kind of helps you read it that way. I just usually take them off because it gets confusing within there. So again, one of the things that Rashi points out over here is that the word olam is missing the vav. Usually we would have a vav over there. It's read olam. I mean, that vav, that vav's place is taken by that little dot over there, if you are fluent in reading Hebrew. So there could be a vav over there. Instead, it's written without a vav. Why is it written without a vav? Because the word olam, if you have it without the vav, that means hidden. And how Rashi interprets that is that there's a hidden fact of our life, and that's the point of our demise. We never are clear. We will never know at what point is our demise. At what point we're going to move to the next world. And that is exactly what spurs us forward in doing the things that we need to do. Okay, we have, if you knew what time if you knew you had time, you would perhaps push off doing things. But since you never know really when's your time, So then you work to take advantage of what time you have, which kind of answers his original question: is how do I outsmart death? All my wisdom and all my money and all my happiness, how am I going to outsmart death? And he's come to this realization that you really can't. So and in fact, it helps the world. It helps us to know that we can't outsmart it, because it pushes us forward. It compels us to do more with the time that we have and the time that we're given, and particularly to help the world that we are dealing with. And the last thing we kind of said last week was that this motto over here, "Et hakol asa yafeh v'ito," actually, it's one of my favorite phrases that I like to pull out often. Again, is that this idea that everything is beautiful in its time, right? So, for example, on Tisha B'Av, it's a time to be sad, right? It would be inappropriate for a person to go around being joyful and happy. And same thing the other way with Purim, as Purim is coming up in about 3 weeks, 4 weeks from or so, right? It would be inappropriate for a person to spend that time sad, right? That's a happy time of year. But that's not just times of year, it's situations and places that we're in. What we have control over, and again, that was the biggest piece, is if you want to find happiness, you have to find the point where your control is and stop pushing beyond that point. And so that's what he kind of said, and that's what he's been getting to. And that's kind of the base, the foundational point of everything he said so far is it's all about happiness. You're only going to find happiness in things that you can control, and releasing control over the things that you can't control, or stop trying to gain control over those things that you cannot. And so again, everything is beautiful in its time, is that realization that it's a time for something else, and that will bring me more happiness through that. Okay, so again, that is verse 11. Once again, that we can't force things to happen. We have a point where our control ends, and that's where our happiness begins, so to speak. We can't do things by ourselves. Is another thing that, I'm sorry, I forgot to point that out. One of the things that Rashi says is one single person can't do everything by themselves, right? You need a shoemaker to make shoes. You need a stable boy to run the stables, using old-timey examples. But no one person can do everything. We need to work together as a community in order to get the world running. And that's another thing that's kind of spurred on by the fact that we have that we don't know when our ultimate demise is, that we realize we have to band together in order to affect positive change in the world. Okay, fine. So I mentioned last week that that's kind of a cap on this idea. It's almost like the end of a chapter. Okay, he's now going to move on in the same category, but I'm going to move on to a bit of a different idea. And that's what he's going to do in verse number 12 over here. So let me highlight this so it's easier to notice. Okay, this is verse number 12. And he starts off with a declaration. He says, Yadati, I know. All right, that saying I know means that we have now, after everything that we've done so far, and we've done what we are considering scientific research, right? Objective research into the idea of happiness. So now I know, ki ein tov bam, that there is no good in them, in the physical world, ki im l'smoach, except to be happy, v'lasot tov b'chayav, and to do good in their lives, in the human lives. Okay, so I'm sorry, I made a mistake over there. Let me read that one more time, because I mistranslated one of the words. Yadati, I now know, ki ein tov bam, that there is no good for humankind, not in the physical world. I'm sorry, for the human people, bam, in them, meaning in the people, ki im l'smoach, except to be happy, v'lasot tov b'chayav, and to do good in their lives. Okay, so again, this is Yadati, meaning saying that I know, now that I've done this research, I know that there is a purpose to being happy. In fact, that's the best thing. There is no goodness besides for being happy. Meaning, if you are trying to understand and you're trying to grasp, what am I supposed to do with my physical things? You're supposed to be happy with them. You're supposed to learn how to enjoy them. Now, again, that came with a bunch of steps. You have to understand when's the right time to use something. You have to understand how to react. That's all on how you react to things. You have to understand where control lies, right? But there is a good, and in fact, there's no good except to be happy with those things that you have. But he adds on one last thing that he has not mentioned until now, and that is v'lasot tov b'chayav. And for them, for the people, for humankind, to do good in their lives. Okay, he has not mentioned this yet. We have seen no mention of a person's relationship with other people through their material wealth. And this is the first time that King Solomon is mentioning this directly. He says now, basically again, now that I've seen everything that I've seen, I now know that there is something, another aspect of happiness, another piece of material in the chain of material, happiness from the material world, and that is to do good in a person's life. Okay.
Well, Rabbi, does he tell
yes.
us what that means to do good? Does that mean following mitzvot? Does it mean giving to tzedakah? Does it mean helping old ladies cross the street? I mean, does he elaborate?
Absolutely. You don't have to worry about that. He will definitely, he's going to get into that. And he's going to do it in a very King Solomon way. He's going to research. He's going to take us again through the process of researching something and seeing it from multiple points of view. So he's going to take us on a bit of a journey, and that's why I kind of said like the last verse was a cap for the last section. Again, this is the next step, building on the last thing that we said. He's now starting a new subcategory or mini subject, and that's going to be how a person acts with their material possessions, with their material wealth, in regards to other people. Okay, he's going to get into the idea of justice. He's going to get into the idea of simply helping out another person, or what our thoughts should be in other people's happiness. So we're gonna see that in the coming verses. Again, I mentioned this pretty often. We, the Jewish people, we did not make the chapters of Kohelet or of any of the books of Tanakh, except for perhaps Tehillim. We didn't make the chapters. The Christian monks of yore made the chapters and they numbered the chapters and verses, right? So if I were to write the book, I would consider this as maybe a new chapter start. But I didn't. We use their system because it happens to work really well and made our lives a lot easier once they invented it. So we stick to it. But this is almost in some ways like a new piece over here. So he says again, I'm going to read this verse again. Yadati, I now know, ki ein tov bam, that there is no good in them. There is no good for people. Ki ein l'smach, except to be happy. Right? So again, we're supposed to find a way. We're supposed to find some path towards happiness with our material wealth. V'lasot tov b'chayav, and to do good in their lives. Okay, that's plural, in their lives. Now, if we were to look at happiness, and from the material particularly, I think our first reaction would be, and I mean, this is definitely many people's reaction, is if I want to enjoy my wealth, if I want to enjoy the material that I have, the intuitive thing is to use it all for myself, right? Intuitively, that's where we would end up. I've got, let's say, I've got millions of dollars. I want to be able to spend it on myself, on my things that will make me happy. Now, he's already showed us that the man who had everything, quite literally everything, anything you could possibly imagine, tried that, and he did not find happiness. Right? That was how we started that was the second chapter, where he was telling us his method for researching happiness. Is he said he tried everything and did not find happiness. So he already has the cred to tell us that that's not the path towards happiness. So now he's telling us that part of it is going to be doing good with your money, with your stuff, with your material possessions, which, by the way, includes with your talents, with your abilities, with what you offer to the community. Okay, there's something to doing good also. All right. So one last point is over here. Why is he harping on this fact of bechayav in their lifetime? He's hinting to us once again that you got to think about your life as something that you never know. You don't know how long it's going to be, right? So if you want to think about dedicating yourself towards other people, or let's hold off on other people. We haven't gone that far yet. But if you want to dedicate yourself towards doing good, you got to think about that in your lifetime, okay? Because you never know. Unfortunately, we don't know, or fortunately, we don't know when that's going to end. So we got to. So it's kind of again moving off that last verse. He's spurring us. That point spurs us towards action. Okay, I'm going to move on to verse number 13 over here. Okay, and he says like this: Vigam, and also, kol ha'adam, all of mankind or humankind, sheyochal, he should eat or they should eat, v'shasa, and to drink, v'ra'atov, and to see good, b'chol amalo, in all of their work, matat Elokim hi. It is a gift from God. Okay, a seemingly non sequitur verse. He says v'gam, and also, right? So I know that goodness in this world is to be happy and to do good in your lifetime, and also all of humankind, that they should eat and drink and see good in their hard work. That is a gift of God. Okay. So again, he says over here, let me read it one more time. V'gam kol ha'adam, and also all of humankind, sheyochal, that literally he should eat, right, singular, that they, singular, they in this case is a singular, they should eat and drink and see good in all their work. That is a gift of God. Okay, so the sages over here, by the way, they like to look at eating and drinking as Torah and mitzvot. All right, so I don't remember which one's which, but it's the idea of a person eats and drinks. That means that they spend their time studying Torah and doing mitzvot. Okay, that's the sages' interpretation of it. Again, that's what they often will do, is they will take this idea and kind of homiletically explain it. So that's what they're doing over here, is they consistently throughout the book, they'll bring up this idea of eating and drinking as being as the idea of studying Torah and learning and doing mitzvot, with doing good deeds with what you have. Okay, so but building off of our last point, I think what he's saying over here is that he's saying you got to look and make the same calculation for other people. Because again, as I said, from an if you were just intuitively to look at happiness from wealth, so your normal reaction is going to be, I have wealth, I want to be happy from it, I'm going to use it all for myself. But you have to look at things from another person's perspective, because I have a right to happiness. I believe I have a right to happiness. By the fact that I believe that I have a right to happiness, I must, or I should at least, believe that everybody else also has the same right to happiness. Meaning that there's got to be some sort of the same calculation that applies to myself and that we've been working with in the book so far has to apply to everybody else too. All right. In fact, so right now, I'm giving a class. So I'm reading the verses of Kohelet. I could just take them all for myself, but the fact is that you're hearing them and you're getting something from them also. So when I say the most important thing in life is for me to enjoy my material happiness, I can't then say, but it doesn't include you enjoying your material happiness. We're all learning the same lesson at the same time, if that makes sense in my brain at least. But what that means is that there has to be some sort of equalness. I don't want to use the word equality because that's a polarized word now. But there has to be some sort of equal exchange with everybody else. If I deserve happiness, and what makes me deserve happiness? Because I'm here, because I'm human, because I'm living, because I'm living in my time, I'm reacting to the things around me. So then everybody else has the same exact reaction to the same things around them. Meaning everyone else that I know also has the same calculation works for them. This is basically my understanding is from the I tend to be a history nerd. This seems to me is a lot of what the discussion was back in the founding of the United States, right? And this was an ongoing thing throughout the Renaissance and the Enlightenment period of time, which is that there's no one person or another who should be who has greater or more or less of a right to happiness, or to the world around them. I'm just going to jump into, because I have to, because it's just how my brain works. This is the Declaration of Independence. I hope everyone can see it. It's a little hard to see. I can't really make that. Maybe I could make it a little bigger. Okay, made it a little bigger there. Okay, and I always find that this is one of the most misunderstood verses. There I am, being a rabbi. This is one of the most misunderstood statements in the Declaration of Independence. Right? He says over here, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Right? So we understand that this is obvious, that all men are created equal. Now that's where the confusion sets in. He's not talking about equality in the same sense that we think about it nowadays. My understanding is that he's referring specifically, this is whatever, Thomas Jefferson and those helping him out, their understanding was in regards to the relationship between subjects and kings, right? That a king has no greater, should, from his perspective and from perspective of the colonists, a king is not more great, is not greater by birth than everybody else. Rather, they understood this to be self-evident that all people are created equal, meaning that they have the same rights, and that they are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, meaning certain things that can never be taken away from them. And that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's very much what we're saying over here, which is that if I believe, once again, if I believe, take King Solomon, if King Solomon believes that he deserves happiness, then he has to apply that same understanding to everybody else. True, he's the king of Israel. He's the wealthiest person around. He's the smartest person in history, as we know from the prophets, right? So you might think that it doesn't apply to him. He's telling you that no, if I'm applying this understanding to myself, I have to apply it to everybody else too. If I deserve happiness and I deserve to enjoy my material things, then so too everybody else has the same right. Every individual human has the same right. And again, this is a very American ideal, but I think that this is exactly what he's saying over here. So I know, once again, I know that my happiness comes from enjoying the material that I have. My happiness let me word that differently. The happiness from the material comes from a whole list of rules, right? I have to understand where my control ends, and all the things that we mentioned so far. But all those same things are going to apply to the other people also. All people, v'gam kol hadam, all people also can eat and drink and see good from their hard work, and that, I believe, is a matat elokim. That is a gift from God. All right. Again, in the same way, like it or not, Thomas Jefferson threw a creator into the Declaration of Independence. Okay, whether that's the place there or not, we understand the same thing, that it's a godly thing. God created it, that all people have the rights to the same things that each other have. That right to find happiness from the material. Okay. So moving on from there, verse number 14 over here. Again, that's chapter 3, verse number 14. He says another declarative statement. And he says, Yadati, I also know. I know. Again, this means that after inspection, after research, he's stating, and I know, Kikol asher ya'aseha Elokim, everything that God has done, hu yihyeh le'olam, will be forever. Alav ein lehosif, upon it there is no place to add. Umimenu ein legroa, and from it there is nothing to subtract. V'ha'elokim asa, and God has done sheyir umilfanav, meaning everything that God has done is there for them to fear Him, to have fear before Him. Now, fear is the bad word. I don't like to use that word because it's taking you in the wrong direction. Right? We think of fear as in trembling. Fear of God is a different type of thing. A much bigger discussion. In fact, this whole verse is a much bigger discussion, and that's actually I'm going to try to avoid stepping in a minefield with this verse. Let me read it one more time because it's a long verse, and we can take again piece by piece. Yadati, I know. Ki kol asher ya'aseha Elokim, that everything that God has done, hu yihyeh la'olam, will be forever. Alav ein lahosif, upon it there is no ability to add. Umimenu ein ligroa, and from it there is not an ability to subtract. V'ha Elokim asa sheyiru'u milafanav, and God has done this so that they fear Him, or so that they act with fear before Him, literally. Okay. My understanding of this verse is that he's bringing up an idea that we all know. Now he doesn't want to get into it. That's the funny thing. I think he's just bringing it up, but he doesn't want to spend too much time talking about it. But the reality is that people have different experiences in their lives. There are people who have bad things happen to them. There are people who have good things happen to them, right? That's just the human experience. There are people who have, and that's most of us, we have a mixture of things, right? We have, typically things go pretty all right. Occasionally things don't go so well. Maybe it's the other way. Usually things don't really work in our favor, but occasionally something works in our favor, right? Nobody really has a pure life is terrible. Everything the person tries falls apart. Okay, but in general, what we have, the human experience, is kind of universal, right? And that's what he says over here. Hu yihyeh la'olam. It is forever. Okay, it is universal and eternal. All right, the way that people's lives are. In fact, no matter how hard a person tries, sometimes there's no opportunity to raise or out of it or to go below it. Right? Some people, everything they touch is gold, and some people, everything they touch falls apart. So in that case, in that way, alav ein lahosif, there's nothing to add. Momenu ein ligroa, and there's nothing to subtract. I mean, in general, we have certain things that are in our control, certain powers and abilities that we're given, but in reality, it's all kind of God's machinations, trying to make sure everything works out for us. But in general, things either go well or don't go well, and our individual power over such a thing is limited. Now, that's a big discussion, right? There's no question that the discussion of why do bad things happen to people, to good people, to bad people? Why do good things happen to bad people, to good people? Why do any of those things happen? That is a huge discussion, right? In fact, the entire book of Job is predicated on that question of why do good things happen to bad people? Why do bad things happen to good people? And that's 42 chapters, right? So if you want an in-depth discussion of that, maybe after Kohelet we could discuss Job. It's a big undertaking, so I'm not going to.
I have a question.
Yes.
I feel like you're taking a leap here, because
Okay.
it seems to me like that there's no opportunity to add and there's no opportunity to subtract would refer to kol asher asa Elohim, right? Everything that is forever. It's like God created the world, and this is the world that we live in, and there's no opportunity to add or subtract to the world, and it's perfect the way it is. How do you get from there to how much control do I have over the good things or the bad things that happen to good or bad people?
Right. So that's a good question. I mean, the reason why I went to this understanding is because I think it fits a little better with the flow of the verses. You're right. I mean, that is definitely I would say that's the more likely explanation of the verses. So let's take a second, just for everyone's benefit. Let's read the verse based on how I understand Jacob is suggesting. Yadati, I know, ki kol asher ya'aseh Elokim, that everything that God has done, hu yihyeh la'olam, will be forever. Alav, on all that God has done, in lahosif, you have no ability to add. Umimenu, and from all that God has done, in ligroa, you do not have the ability to subtract. V'ha Elokim asa, and God has made it, sheyiru'u milafanav. Sorry about that. In a way that they will, in order so that they will act with fear before Him. Okay. So yeah, that is definitely, let me put it out there. That's exactly how the verse should be read. So you're absolutely right, Jake. I'm taking that perhaps a step further. Yeah, I'm taking that a step further. And so what I'm saying is that he's specifically referring to the human experience and the fact that so everything that God has done, right? Everything that God has done lasts forever, and we don't have an ability to add or subtract from that. In our discussion over here, we're talking specifically about gaining or trying to gain happiness from the material. And he's introducing this new topic of how we treat or how we relate to others with our material wealth. Now, okay, so let's see how this fits in with the rest of the verses. Okay, how about this? Let's hold both of those possibilities in our head and see how they work with the following verses. I appreciate that, Jake, because I think you're definitely right, and let's see how it plays out in the coming verses. I had a hard time myself kind of trying to figure out what was the flow here from verse 13 to 14 to 15. So let's see if we could kind of work those in together. All right, so let me read the verse one more time. Let's go with Jacob's understanding of it and see how that goes. Yadati, again, I'm going to read it one more time. Yadati, I know, Kikol asher yaseha Elokim, that all that God has done, hu yihyeh olam, will be forever. Alav ein lo sif, upon it there is no ability to add, or no permission to add. I'm not sure which one that it is exactly. Umimenu, and from it ein legroa, you cannot subtract. And v'ha'elokim asa shiru milafana, and God has done this in order so they will act with fear before him. Okay, that, by the way, those final four words, that's one of our sages' mottos. All right, they love that phrase. They bring it up a lot of times. That God has created the world, basically, and it's kind of like so why is there creation here? Well, creation's here. God has created it so that he will act with fear before him. Now, how that fits in with a whole worldview, good question. But that is a track that the sages take a lot of times. That the purpose of creation is for, again, this thing that we're calling fear. Fear, again, bad translation. It's the one we use because it's the easiest one, I guess. It's really awe. It's really acting appropriate, as opposed to it's realization of God's presence constantly. It's a little different than fear, but that's the word that we end up using just because it's the easiest translation. So again, this is again, the rabbis bring this up a lot of times. They say, "Halukim asa shiru milafana." God has done it, has done everything that in order so that they will have fear before him. Okay. Now, moving on to the next verse, because this is a flow, so we're trying to see the flow together. Verse number 15, he says, "Mashahaya," and that which was, Mashahaya, that which was, kivarhu, already was. Va'asher lehiot, kivar haya, and once again, that which is going to be also already was. Okay, I messed up the tenses over there. Let me try that one more time. Mashahaya kivarhu, that which was already is. Va'asher lehios, and that which will be, kivar haya, already was. Okay, meaning that things in the past, things that are the same things that you find in the future. Things in the future are things that you already found in the past, right? He's already kind of touched on this a number of times. We saw that there's nothing new under the sun, that idea that he's mentioned before. All right, so there's nothing new about our experiences, right? Again, the human experience is not a new thing. Each generation with its own trials and tribulations, those are things which are eternal, right? You're not going to find something that was never, that's completely unprecedented. But he ends off saying over here, et nirdath, and God searches out the one who is chaste. All right, the shorish there, the Hebrew root word there is that resh dalid pei radaf, which means to chase. So God searches out the one who is chaste. All right, what we would call in English the underdog. Okay, so the idea over here is that that which was already is, that which is will be already was, meaning that the human experience that we're going to be experiencing at all times always was and always will be, right? The same trials, again, the same trials and tribulations that face every generation, are ones that were already faced in some form or another in previous generations, and will also in the future. But one underlying principle comes out, which is that God seeks out the underdog. Now, that doesn't always mean necessarily that just because somebody's an underdog, that means that they're the hero, right? That's, if you watch Disney movies, that's the message you always get, right? That the underdog is, by nature of being the underdog, is the hero. That's not necessarily true. But what it does mean is that God has a special place for the one who is the underdog. Meaning, okay, so looking at the history of the world, looking at the entire human experience, there's always people in power. There's always people under power, who are under the power of others. God is always looking out for the ones who are on the bottom. Again, not that it doesn't mean that they're necessarily in the right, but it definitely means that God, they have caught the attention of God. Now, he's building a point over here. This is my understanding, is he's building this point over here that we're talking about. You got to figure out a way to do good with your material, right? If you just hoard it all to yourself, then you're not going to achieve happiness. Where will you find happiness? In doing good. So far as Jacob pointed out earlier also, is that he has not yet told us what good is, but he is setting up something over here. And you can already kind of see where he's going with this, is that he's going to start talking about this kind of idea of helping those who are less fortunate than ourselves. Particularly, he's going to get, we'll see next week more about that. But he's setting up this idea over here again that the human experience is all going to be the same, right? Things are going to be eternal, right? Let's read the last verse as Jacob's way. So now that I'm thinking about it more, I think I'm thinking more and more that you're correct in how you're reading it, which is again this idea that the world is a certain way. We can't add or subtract to it. It's there for the purpose, and that itself is there for the purpose of us fearing him, or again, whatever fearing him means. And our experiences are not new; they're the same old experiences. But one thing does come about, which is that you start to see that God does look out for, not necessarily favor. I jumped the gun by saying favor. But God looks for the underdog. The way I actually want to read that is God looks to see how people treat the nirdaf, how people treat the underdog. Because bikush means to search out for something, not necessarily to support something. So ivakesh, Hashem is searching for the one who is chaste. What I'm thinking over here is that he's saying that one thing that God's looking for is he wants to see how we treat the nirdaf, how we treat this person who's chaste. Now, why he's choosing chasing is a good question in of itself, but I don't want to. Maybe we'll pick up from here. Well, let's plan to pick up from this verse again next week, because we're out of time. All right, thank you all for joining us. We'll come back here next week, please, and we'll pick up and.